Today, we're headed up to Omaha, Nebraska, a city home to great steaks, big business, and the eastern terminus of Union Pacific's historic overland route. Each day, countless trains ranging from small yard jobs to megalithic intermodals pass through here in Council Bluffs, Iowa. While we could sit around and wait for something cool to come screaming over the high iron, the most impressive catches in this area are actually incapable of being moved. Some are historic display pieces, while many are awaiting scrap, and others just seem to defy all logic. The first locomotives we catch are quite famous and have been seen by millions of people. It's UP 4023 and 6900, the pair in Kenfick Park that stand watch over I-80. These two represent the largest locomotive models in the world. 6900 is not only the first DD40AX ever produced, it's also the first locomotive to bring the modern safety cab design to the United States, which can now be found on thousands of engines across the continent. Between 1969 and 1971, 47 of these Goliath engines were built as a replacement for UP's finicky G-tails, which were hilariously nicknamed bird burners. The Centennials were made to haul heavy priority freights at speeds up to 80 miles an hour and typically served on UP's busiest routes. While something this big might seem clunky and unwieldy, they were actually preferred by crews. Quiet cabs, quick acceleration, and smooth riding made them an ideal locomotive to operate. But it wasn't just the train crews that liked them. The Centennials were the pride and joy of Union Pacific as a whole. Over the course of their service life, each engine traveled an average of 1.8 million miles. But as rail traffic declined, and these behemoths began to get on in years, Union Pacific chose to retire all of them by the late 80s. While most were scrapped, one remained in service with UP until 2016 for special occasions, but it was donated to Railroad and Heritage of Midwest America last year. Today, 12 of the 13 surviving DD40AXs can be found in preservation around the country, and the other ones in Mexico City. Of course, right next to the world's largest diesel locomotive is the world's largest steam locomotive. 25 big boys were made in the early 40s, but despite their fitting nickname, UP never intended to call them as such. The 4884 locomotive class was originally going to be called the Wasatch type, as their purpose was to haul fast high-tonnage trains through the Wasatch Mountains around Utah and Wyoming. But as the story goes, an anonymous employee wrote the words Big Boy on the smoke box of a yet-to-be-completed locomotive, and the name has stuck ever since. Because these behemoths were critical to UP's priority freight services, they ended up becoming some of the last holdouts for revenue steam power in America. It wasn't until 1959 that the last freight train was hauled by one of these giants, and 4 were stored in operable condition until the early 60s, just in case. While big boys, particularly 4014, have regularly been in the public eye since the 2010s, this actually isn't the first time they've seen the limelight. In 1954, Union Pacific and Robert Montgomery put on a live TV special that told the story of a big boy engineer and his son, who, after coming back from Korea, doesn't want to follow in his father's footsteps by working for the railroad, and believes diesel is the future. The show can be a little corny sometimes, but it's overall a good watch. And besides, who doesn't love original footage of the big boys in revenue service? Across the river in Council Bluffs, we catch an ancient GP7R elevator switcher. This engine was made 73 years ago in 1951 for the once massive C&W Railroad. After it was sold off sometime between the late 90s and early 2000s, it became an elevator switcher for Bartlett Grain, which it still serves today. What's super cool is that the repaint this thing got nearly 20 years ago actually preserved the old C&W paint. And now, decades later, it's starting to poke through. Repainting locomotives on top of their original colors is actually a very common practice because it's cheap, quick, and easy. Take these Norfolk Southern SD60s for example. From afar they look pretty normal, but upon closer inspection, you'll see there's many spots where pristine Conrail paint is showing through. While this engine might not be as vibrant as it once was, much of the original logos and report marks are still in great shape considering this thing's age. I'm sure by now you've noticed the strange set of lights mounted to the roof. In all my travels, I have never seen or heard of something like this, but apparently these are a somewhat common feature on elevator and plant switchers. They're indicator lights, used during remote control operation, and they signify the status of the locomotive to everyone on the ground, whether it be in forward, neutral, reverse, or some kind of fault such as emergency or wheel slip. Indicator lights like this can range in numbers from 6 all the way up to 10, but because each company tends to assign different meanings to each pair of lights, being able to definitively say what these ones here stand for is not possible. Towards the rear of the locomotive, I came across another piece of equipment I'd never seen before, and it turns out this is an electric block heater, just like the ones found in your pickup truck or heavy machinery. While this heater won't keep the fuel from gumming up, it will save the engine block from being destroyed, as most locomotives only use plain water as coolant. Traditionally, engines are either idled all winter, put into auto start mode, or drained all their coolant until warmer weather rolls around. But a first-gen hood unit such as this doesn't have any of those fancy auto start features, and certainly couldn't stand to run for months on end. So in order to keep the prime mover in one piece, while also keeping the locomotive ready for use at the drop of a hat, you almost have to use an electric block heater. On the other side of the elevator, we catch an old Rock Island wood deck flat car, waiting to be scrapped. It might not be the most interesting thing in the world, but it sure is cool that you can still find remnants of the rock nearly 45 years after they shut down. Speaking of old rail cars, just a few hundred feet away from Bartlett Grain lies a mysterious cut of abandoned rolling stock. Some of them, such as these tankers here, are pretty darn old. Riveted steel construction and journal boxes are a dead giveaway that these were made sometime in the mid-20th century. Others, however, were made somewhat recently. Oregon and Northwestern boxcars can still be found out on the rails from time to time. I have no clue as to why these cars are here or what's going to happen to them. I know they've been in this field for around 25 years, and they'll probably be here for 25 more, seeing as how they can't be moved. Not only do the tracks they sit on not connect to any other lines, but most of the cars have had their couplers, draft gears, and air connections removed. Why? I have no idea. Even though there's only 22 cars here, most of them are real gems. Ever seen a Lamb Weston boxcar? Well, neither have I. Apparently this belonged to a food processing plant of the same name based out of the Pacific Northwest. And right next to this oddity was an old UP Caboose, and what I presume to be a Pullman car. Looks like it belonged to a tourist railroad. Heaven only knows how old this thing is. What's even more awesome is that some equipment here has remained remarkably intact. The passenger car still has its ceiling fans, and the cabooses still have their alternator belts. Other pieces of rolling stock included Southern Pacific's classic Hydra cushions. These had special underframes equipped with hydraulic dampers that further absorbed impacts from slack and switching, creating a much safer environment for the cargo inside. There was also an old boxcar from Toledo, Peoria, and Western, a lucrative short line that basically got eaten alive by its neighboring railroads. The good news is that they're still in operation under Genesee and Wyoming. Certainly one of the most unexpected catches here was a boxcar from the historic Lehigh Valley Railroad. Lehigh Valley was primarily a coal hauling line that operated in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. For 130 years, they brought anthracite coal from rural Appalachian mines to consumers and businesses across the world. But like many other small Class 1s back then, they fell into financial ruin around the 1960s and were absorbed into Conrail come 1976. Today, Lehigh Valley is remembered through Norfolk Southern 8104. The last cool cars we see here are a couple bay window cabooses. The Union Pacific one was used on everyday road trains, but the old Mopac one is a transfer caboose, used specifically for shuttling cuts of cars between yards or neighboring railroads. While a road caboose would be decked out with a stove, bunks, leather seats, and much more, you'd be lucky if you got so much as a desk and some basic equipment in one of these transfer variants. That's because all the runs they made were pretty short. At most, a transfer job would only take you a few hours. Really, the only difference between this and a road caboose is that it's just more bare bones. It would have carried all the same personnel and fulfilled all the same duties as its mainline variant. What's even cooler is that transfer cabooses are still around in a sense. These days, when a train is working a job that involves a long shove, it's not uncommon to see an old caboose tacked onto the rear. When used in this manner, they're referred to as shoving platforms, and the only thing they do is give conductors a safe place to stand. And finally, in a small junkyard just off I-29, we see two exceedingly rare locomotives in the most peculiar of spots. Number 71 here is a classic Alco S3, perched on top of a boxcar. Getting this thing off its frame and set up here, while also keeping the car body in one piece, must have taken some serious skill and precision. Locomotive car bodies are made of thick sheet metal on top of an angle iron substructure, and they really ain't designed to support themselves in the absence of a frame. But that doesn't mean they can't. Scenes like this are just surreal. It reminds me of the stacks of rail equipment that used to be at the Vickbury scrapyard in England, or the parts boxes people keep for their model railroads. Just miscellaneous shells and railcar pieces thrown wherever they'll fit. But by far the most impressive locomotive in Council Bluffs is Burlington Northern number 994, one of only 4 surviving EMD NW5s in the world. What's even wilder is that this locomotive was a rare breed from day one, because only 13 examples were produced between 1946 and 1947. Great Northern purchased a majority of them, rostering 10 units. Southern bought 1, and the Union Belt of Detroit bought the remaining 2. The NW5 was actually built to be a passenger terminal switcher, with many hosting a steam generator under the short hood. But this role was rather short-lived, as these were incredibly versatile, reliable locomotives. Great Northern, and later Burlington Northern, put the majority of their fleet to work on rural branch lines in the upper Midwest, essentially making the NW5 a road switcher before road switchers existed. As for the other 2 railroads, they just used them like normal yard power. Like any old switch engine, the majority of the NW5s were either scrapped or sold off to small industrial railroads and then scrapped. But even after all these years, there remain 2 engines that are still operational. The most notable one is Great Northern number 192, which pulls excursion trains for the North Shore Scenic Railway out of Duluth, Michigan. And the other is Massachusetts Central number 2100, Southern's lone unit, which is still hauling revenue freight at nearly 80 years old. As for 994 here, there's no telling how much longer it has left. Just like number 71, it's been sitting atop its boxcar for almost 20 years. While it'll likely be here for many more years to come, it is in a very slow process of being scrapped, and could be done away with at the drop of a hat. So if you're ever driving across I-29 or visiting the Omaha area, keep your eyes peeled for these rare and historic pieces of equipment. Many won't be around for as long as you think. Thanks for watching. If y'all enjoyed this video, consider checking out some other ones of mine. Also, maybe pass yourself by the merch shop. Anyways, till next time.